Welcome back, everyone. As I mentioned, I did this quick little presentation up on some fishing rigs. So it's about, I think, 5 or 6, so not very many, but just the mainstay ones and some variations on those that I'll be going into when I actually make them up, and I'll show you some ways where we can change them depending on the circumstances. And how I like to do things as well. But this way it gives you the idea of them and some of the names behind the different ones, so that if I mention any of them, you kind of get an idea of what they are, what they're used for, when you might be using these types of rigs, purpose behind them, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, feel free to click subscribe, as there'll be a lot more of these sort of things coming out over the next few days as I do these up and put them together. I'm trying to keep them to a shorter sort of time frame, so I'll be doing short portions of different ones, covering not only normal baiting but soft plasticking and luring as a combination of the different styles. But anyway, let's get into it. So the 6 main ones I'll be looking at, you're running the sinker, or it comes sometimes referred to as slip or Carolina rig, Patternoster, the double Patternoster. You can even have a triple, the float Patternoster rigs, fish finder rig, a pulley rig, bucktail or lure combination rig, and then some ideas around soft plastics and lure variation rigs, which incorporate some of the ones above where you don't need to modify much of your other bait rigs to introduce soft plastics or flash lures or bucktails or so forth like that, but can still use some apart from just attaching a lure at the end of your line. So first up, still running, we're going to be looking at this one, a running lure. I won't try and talk my way through this, so if you want, pause and read some of this, but the main purpose of this is just, it's very common. It's usually mainly for your bottom foraging fish, so you cast it out, sits on the bottom, and your bait and the hook comes off the bottom and floats slightly with the current. So it's best used when you've got a little bit of current. The idea of the running sinker is that when the fish takes the bait, it might not feel the resistance straight away. So if you've got fish that are a little bit sensitive to that type of thing, will drop it. This way you got a higher chance of actually grabbing them and hooking them on, because they'll eat it rather than just tapping it and then going, no, there's something heavy on that, I'm not going to grab it. So essentially it's simply attaching a sinker on your main line, putting a swivel between that and your actual hook, and making it in such a way that your actual bait itself doesn't swivel and look around, that doesn't look unnatural. You can put beads in here between the swivel and your sinker. Usually it's a ball or a bead style sinker, and the weight and number depends obviously on the condition. So if it's heavy, if you need it heavy to get it out further because of the wind and so forth, you might have to load up a little bit more on the sinkers, where if it's really light, obviously taking it away. So it just depends on your needs, so it can really fit to it. So when you're setting these up, you're making it so that there is the option for you to be able to add more in if you need them. And I'll go through my way of doing this, where I have clip in, so I can add in extra ones or change them out as I need to without having them fiddle around too much. You can see here what it does, how it works best, and what you're sort of targeting, and how that all works. So that's pretty much straightforward, that is. There's lots of different pictures and types of these types of rigs, and everyone can be a little bit different on it, but that's the core crux of what one of these are. And how they look on the bottom is where your sinker will sit on the bottom of the floor, and then hopefully the bait should float up slightly off sits up there. You may need to use, I don't think I mentioned in here, but you may need to use, some people put a slight float in this area to lift the bait up even higher if you're having issues with like crabs and so forth, just sitting there munching away on your bait. A lot of people put a little bit of a tiny float, foam float along this line back from the actual hook to try and help get it up slightly off the bottom. So the Patternoster is the most common sort of style that you see. A lot of people using this to catch tailor. Now there are a lot of variations on this style rig, but the main concept is simply it's presented. Your bait's presented above the sinker, and at the bottom you generally have a star sinker. You can have the bomb style sinker or your reef breakaway sinkers, depending upon what you've got out there, what the conditions are. If it's rocks and so forth, you're going to prefer a reef breakaway sinker or your bomb style one, so it can get out of those holes if you get stuck. The double and the triple just simply means referring to adding more options down here, so you can have a main line coming down, and you can either use swivels or sometimes you dropper knots, and I put a dropper knot so I can clip in different style hooks. I might have my gang hook here if I wanted to gang up for a muley or whatever, and I might have another dropper further down with a smaller hook, and another one with a different size hook with a different bait, so presenting a few options. And then at the very bottom you've got your sinker, which you want on a clip, preferably with a swivel, so that you can change the weight in and out depending on the conditions. You might want heavier to get it out further, and the floating versions are pretty much the same, except for you sticking a float above where all your bait's presented above here to help hold it close to the surface, just in case the fish aren't on the bottom, and also to avoid things if you've got a lot of rocks, weeds, or snags sitting on the bottom, just keeps it slightly off. So, and you may need to change the float size to accommodate for that. So it may take a little practice to work out what works. But these are really well done if you can present them well, and make them adaptable and interchangeable so that you can change them out on and off. I also have sitting up the top here as a float. It's like a variation of a bucktail with the flashy bits and a hook hanging off it, and then lower down droppers and present off a couple of options. And you can use these, when I mention a bit later, use these with soft bucks and stuff. But this is mainly if you're looking at tailor. A lot of tailor will hit up for this. Obviously, you still can get your herring, snapper, salmon, obviously. And with the smaller stuff, you still might even get your smaller fish like whiting and brim on this, if you're using smaller hooks, not gangs and so forth. But that's this is one of the main ones you'll end up using. And if you learn to use it correctly with your uses of interchangeable options, then go for it. And I know I'll be demonstrating my versions of these and what they all look like and how do you space them out and everything from there. Next one is called a fish finder rigs. They're very similar to Carolina rig or your sliding sinker, except instead of having just a ball sinker sitting along the line, you actually have what's called as a slip sinker clip. So it's a clip that runs along your main line, or this is a shock leader, but essentially this is your main line. And by the way, before I go any further, I forgot to mention, when I'm doing all these lines, I'm using a fluorocarbon leader. So that's the fluorocarbon. The reason why we use fluorocarbon is invisible to the fish. They don't see it. So when I'm saying using less, like swivels and clips and so forth, I use the less if possible, so that there's less other objects around, and this is all clear and they can't see anything but the presentation of the bait wherever possible. So yeah, fluorocarbon leader is what you should be using. Anyway, so you put a clip sinker on here, and you're putting your star sinkers on here, and the weight obviously depends on what you're looking for. So, as in how far you want to get out. So this one here is where the foam, similar to the floating Patternoster, where I mentioned you could put foam on there to lift it further off the bottom to avoid those crabs that have a crack at your bait and so forth. So you might want to stick that above. This one's clipping a hook on, this one's tying a hook on. So they're preferences. Everyone has their own sort of style or way of doing these up. But the less objects you have around there, the better, but also you want the ability to change things in. The reason why this stuff works, it fits in with challenging conditions which help attract the fish, like it mentions here, with little cover and minimum structure. So if you don't have much going on out in the surf, and you got not a lot of beef structure, the sinker helps fight that current, holds it near the bottom while still presenting that bait, whilst resisting some of the current. The sinker itself kicks up sand, so it helps kind of indicate or imitate a wounded fish, and at the end obviously your bait is sometimes bouncing off and down the bottom as a reaction between the current and the sinker. And the slip sinker clips allows them to take the bait directly off the main line, reducing that initial pull so they feel that initial pressure straight away, so you can get a better chance of grabbing it. And as I mentioned, the float's there to keep your crabs and stuff off it.